welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is in confrontation with the world.
Tim Longo.
Man who's not only in confrontation with the world, but is most definitely lost in it.
Particularly
this world.
This
the
world.
Of Planescape Torment. Of Sigil and the Plains and there's a million other things that you have to try to figure out as you play.
Yeah, I'm just, Brett surpassed me now, I think, I know, and it's overwhelming.
He means in the game. It was already.
Yeah, right. I'm talking about in the game.
Passed you by.
Outside of the game, we can talk in another time, another place. That's a different topic. But I guess Brett and I were just talking pre-show about this, and there's just so much going on in this game now. We actually, we're having a hard time talking about each of the topics because it's just so many things are coming to mind. But the specific topic for me right now is just the permutations. I'm in the Clerk's ward, and I still haven't gotten to Ravel's maze, though I believe I'm close. I've spent quite a bit of time in the Clerk's ward. But once you get to the Clerk's ward, Brett was kind of running through, just quickly trying to enumerate how many, basically, zones there are up to that point. And it's not like a directed RPG in that, you're kind of as you're going through the story, you are eliminating zones as you are sort of, quote-unquote, finishing them, or they're kind of progressing you forward in maybe a more traditional sense. And so all you're really doing is adding variables and permutations to your possibilities when it comes to solving a quest.
That's very true of sort of modern RPGs. Even modern sort of open world RPGs that are kind of descendants of this, like Dragon Age Inquisition from a few years back. Mm-hmm. There are zones, and you can return to them at any time, but you sort of have a quest list, right? It's like, if I want to go back there, I have these 3 or 4 things I know I can go do there.
Yeah.
Here it's more, I have 3 or 4 things to do, or more. I have several things to do, and a few that I'm not even sure where to do. In some cases,
yeah.
So, I get you.
Yeah, well, and you had, I think, appropriately said, well, there is a journal, and you do have a quest log, which is the most minimalistic quest log probably possible, right? It doesn't even distinguish secondary from primary, or critical path from secondary, I guess I'll say. And it heavily relies on just the raw narrative and writing of everything, right? And to your point about yes, as I'm in a conversation with somebody, the nameless one is definitely cluing me into when the journal has been updated. But those fly by often enough to where I've kind of probably unfortunately toned them out a little bit, and I don't tend to go back and read them as they unlock. I only go there if I'm kind of searching for something. And yes, you're right that it is a searchable interface, but there's times when I'm just I have some theories, but I'm not even sure what I would search for, and so it's a little disheartening to think to myself, well, I guess I could just go through and read the whole journal and skim it and catch up on things I haven't read to kind of look for clues there. But it's obviously not on this scale, but it's like taking a novel and and going back and reading through it to try to find the answer to a puzzle sometimes. Yeah, so at least that's the way it feels to me.
Yeah,
so.
No, I get you. It's worse than that because, at the very least with a novel, you'd know kind of in what direction you were going. It's more like a novel where they just kind of cut random paragraphs out and threw them on the table. And now you have to try to assemble them in some kind of order.
It's like needle in a haystack again, I guess, that topic from last time. So I guess, long story short, I'm in this point now where I have a feeling that I'm kind of progressing slowly and maybe chipping away at things, but I'm just, I'm kind of shutting down a little bit because I'm overwhelmed with the possibilities, and I second guess. I think I probably, every time we play a game like this on the podcast, I complain about this. I second guess myself on whether I am on the right track. And so I kind of think, oh, maybe I need to go over here, or maybe I need to do this. And then what's more, in the Clerk's Ward, wait, I think it's a Clerk's Ward, maybe it's the Lower Ward. It's the puzzle, I think it's Lower Ward, where you actually visit that one necromancer or mage or something, where you actually go into his basement.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's working with the wererats, right? Oh, yeah, that's right. It's to get Morte back, right? Well, I want to talk about that with you and the whole skull thing. Because that's why I kind of had seeded in, I think, the previous episode. I wanted to know how you dealt with
Soego?
What's his name? Soego?
Soego, maybe? Or Soego, maybe? Yeah, exactly.
That's
actually part of the problem, is that in I don't know, a kind of standard, Infinity Engine game, he'd be called, even in like The Witcher 3, he'd be like, the Baron Blood or whatever. I mean, he'd have something very memorable, not alphabet soup word. That actually makes it kind of hard to get, your fingers into a thing, because there are very few names that are recognizable in any way, and that's fine for an episode of Star Trek when they're going to be gone at the end of the episode, but when you're trying to keep track of all this stuff, it really becomes like you look at a thing and you're like, okay, I have no idea if you're a person I needed to talk to, and you can normally sort that out from the dialogue and your options you have, but and that might be your hints, but unless you can kind of just juggle a lot of this together. And honestly, I played all day Sunday pretty much, and I think that helped because I was just in it all day.
Keeping a continuity helps, right?
It's hard to keep the continuity if you're not kind of constantly refreshing those little details in your mind. So I had his name actually written down here a minute ago, and I deleted it. But it's Soego. Okay, I went and looked it up.
Yeah, and it's just like we were talking about in pre-show too, that this is a game with a lot of proper nouns and a lot of things to keep track of, and log in your head. And the journal helps and the quest log helps to some degree, but how they all interrelate and what's the history and the rule set and all of the locations and and then there's even just a bunch of like magical, well, not magical, but just there's aspects to the planes themselves that have a bunch of rule sets that seem to apply to how things logistically work together. But if you're not kind of grokking it as some random person is explaining it to you, I get distracted easy. So sometimes I'm not totally seeing how 2 connects, 2 plus 2 connects, and all that. But, so you can kind of add all that up. And I think you made a good point in pre-show as a segue to another topic related to this of tropes, which we've talked a little bit about. It's a double-edged sword because I think we both said we love how this is playing against tropes and expectations of RPGs, especially D&D games, and that's really refreshing and cool and experimental and bold. But I'll let you make the point further, but as you said about tropes, like there's also a reason we have them, so maybe expand upon that.
Tropes are often signposts, right? I mean, you all know the story a little bit, behind a trope. That's how it's a trope. You've heard it before, and even if some of the details might be changed, you have the opportunity to have something you can hold on to, and I think often, in this game, we're a lot like Nameless himself in that there's, we just can't keep it all in our brain. And while we have his journal, which is how he's keeping track of everything besides, it's a lot to take in constantly. I sort of get it. I mean, then tying this in with another one with Tattooed Skin, it is a little bit like Memento, where every time you're faced with some new bit of information, you're losing a little bit of other information, and you're having to like reconstruct things, as you go. And that's the, like every 3 or 5 minutes or whatever in that movie, he loses his memory, and has to kind of reconstruct where he is and what's going on, and
start back over. I think it's an excellent point, just because like we were celebrating, when we started the game, we were celebrating that concept of breaking those norms. And expectations, which I still think is a really big strength of the game, and it's a good reason to play it. But but it's just a double-edged sword because it changes the usability of things in a way, right? Where your expectations, and I mean, we're speaking as Western RPG players, right? Who've played D&D and have a past with Tolkien-esque kinds of things. But obviously, I know across the planet, culturally, not everyone is in that boat, right? So there's some people that playing Baldur's Gate would also be confusing. But I think that. Your point about modern games, which is interesting, that this game definitely has a legacy that builds upon this, and I think, Dragon Age is a good example. To the point about Witcher, which you made, which I kind of not realizing until just this, moments ago when you mentioned it, that the interesting thing about Witcher that I really love about how they handle lore and tropes is that there are tropes and there are aspects that are similar to Planescape in that they are playing upon those tropes, and they do it in interesting and unexpected ways where they will take a myth, and some of this is just kind of the Eastern European side of it, right. But the original author, who I will butcher his name and forget how to pronounce it, so I won't mention it, but the author of the Witcher books, I'll basically... put it in the show notes. Yeah, we'll have to look it up. I don't want to butcher it. But he, having read just the first novel that everything's based on, he basically takes common fairy tales and retells them with this gothic, dark, Tolkien-esque, Polish-influenced way. So there's aspects that you recognize, like Beauty and the Beast. I know that story roughly, but this version is totally messed up and very different in these some fundamental ways. But it's enough of a trope, but also enough freshness to, you know what I mean? It's like a nice balance. And here they kind of just throw all of it out, and it's not balanced at all. So I just think Witcher is an interesting kind of mixture to compare to this, and where I'm not completely lost, but also
I get what you're saying. I mean, I haven't played much of The Witcher, but I did recently read, in the last 6 months or so, I read Angela Carter's retellings of basically fairy tales as short stories. Famous collection, The Bloody Chamber, and other stories. And it's the same sort of thing where the hook is they're mostly feminist retellings. So your mileage may vary, audience, but I was really curious about them, and I remember them being a thing, kind of getting rediscovered in the, late 80s or something when I first heard about them. I finally tracked down a copy, and it's a similar sort of thing where it's twist on a particular story or told from an unusual perspective, but still recognizably this other thing or inspired by this other thing.
Yeah.
And, that is just part of our lingua franca, right? That's just something we've heard a million times in a million different ways that so much of, Western storytelling is built on, in a million ways. I mean, these things show up in TV shows, right? I mean, it's not, we see it all the time. We soak in it, as it were.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, when something follows that format, it's kind of easy to follow. Here, like I pointed out in the first episode, you don't even know what to keep, in your inventory, because, as you pointed out in that first episode, anything can open a portal, and you're like, oh my god,
in fact,
what a terrifying border.
One of the first most important ones is junk, right?
That's trash. Yeah.
What is this like? It's almost like, I mean, in a way, even though it's super cool, as we talked about in the first episode, it's almost like a middle finger to the player of like, hey, remember all those other like whatever Fallout games or whatever where you're picking up literal trash and we even call it trash loot, and we just sell it to vendors. That's actually really important, and I really admire that choice as that kind of middle finger, but also like, like from a usability standpoint, like be careful what you wish for, I guess. And I think in the Dragon Age examples and Witcher examples, we've just had enough, evolution of usability with that stuff, where it's quest tracking and map design and all sorts of usability that's been added to games, where you can be opaque with that stuff and still give them direction in a UI way or something, where it's like, I don't really know what the deal is with this thing, but it's
telling you what area to go to.
Yeah, or something. Yeah, I mean, but as we also talked about,
sometimes it's there in the text, right? And so having the searchable journal is really helpful. And I leaned on that a couple of times where I had gotten to the point where I was having a hard time progressing the main quest, and even though I knew what I was trying to do, which was to find Ravel Puzzlewell, I believe her name is, this old hag and her maze, and I'd gotten lots of information about her and how she's trapped in this maze, which is we're going to talk about mazes next time because you haven't caught up, and there's a few mazes that I encountered this time. Part of that is I think the whole game is itself, especially in this first half, is also a maze in all these different ways. So it's a good theme and something we'll definitely talk about, but you have to play a little more. Anyway, so I knew that's what I was after, but I was stuck. I had no idea what to do, and so I started doing a few things. One, I would open the quest journal and I'd go and I'd just go one by one, like, have I done anything recently on this, and maybe I can do something about it. And there'd be names in there like talk to Mar about whatever, about the curiosity box or whatever that I picked up in the first chapter. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that was something I could finish off.
Yeah.
But then I had to search, and like, who's Mar and where do I find him? Oh, right, okay, so he's in the hive somewhere, and I just started wandering the hive. It took me a while to find that guy. So I spent half an hour doing that. Or I went to the curiosity shop, and just at that point I had a ton of copper, and I just would like buy stuff. Like, I'm just going to buy everything I can buy and start trying to figure out how that applies. Like, yeah. And that was just a ton of very rich quest stuff in the Clerk's ward, especially. I don't think too much of it crossed over elsewhere. But, I mean, and this was, I guess this might take us to another topic that, I wanted to broach, was just that. So, and we had an email from a listener about this, and I don't think we're going to read the email this time just because it's a little bit too much, but it's from Anthony Halderman, so shout out to you, Anthony. But that's the idea that, this is some really, really rich and broad content in terms. It's just a ton of stuff. Like, there's like, for each section of the shop, there's maybe 5 or 6 items, and there's 3 sections of the shop. So there's, close to 20 things you can buy. So just finding inventory space is kind of a pain in the neck. But I would kind of do it. I'd go and I'd buy a couple more and try to figure out what I could do with those. And I would end up getting like little quests of like, oh, this person wants to forget everything, and this person wants a bit of candy, and this, you just get this. You get the stuff would start to pile up, and pulling on those million different little threads would actually eventually nudge me back towards the main quest, and that ultimately was how I found my way through that. But the point I actually wanted to make was that all of that was really terrifyingly interesting because it was all so strange. But that in a standard RPG, like a bog standard kind of boring, totally Tolkien, whatever, D&D framework, that would be tedious in the extreme. Like, you never in a D&D campaign stop into a city and do 30 fetch quests. That's just not a thing that happens. If you were to sit down around the table with your buddies, you're not going to, for 6 weeks, do 5 fetch quests a night. That's just not a thing that's going to happen. But I sat down and did that for several hours. Granted, it took a little less time because it's a computer RPG and it's just me. But I think the point stands that mechanically, I'm doing a bunch of fetch quests and getting XP. I'm walking this object from point A to point B, getting some number, this number gets larger, and maybe I level up. But really, it was kind of like a quest grind, except that all the narrative was, interesting. It was different. It was unusual. It was refreshing. And in the same ways that were kind of negative in, the sort of first part of our discussion, it was a positive. It made all this mechanical kind of, doldrums kind of fade away because I was really, I was really interested in the text, and I'd read about this thing, and most of them I didn't remember, and 10 years from now, I'm going to still not remember them. So I'm not sure how much they really stuck. But in the moment, I was kind of enthralled, by the materials. Anyway, I bring this up because Ian Bogost, who is an acquaintance, he's a professor at Georgia Tech. He wrote an article last week in the Atlantic about how maybe games should just abandon narrative. Maybe they're better off without them.
Oh, Ian.
Ian likes to throw those hand grenades. And I was thinking about this, and I sort of see his point in the sense that if narratives is the only thing that is propping up your game, then maybe the underlying game isn't all that interesting. Whereas counterexamples they would give are things like, hey, it's soccer, it's a ball, and however many guys and 2 nets. Or, Tetris, there's these, 4 different shapes, or 5, 6 different shapes, whatever it is in Tetris, of tetronomos, and fitting together and making them disappear. And those are pretty simple rule sets that are nonetheless, and then you go to board games like Go and chess that have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and those things don't have narratives. None of those things have narratives. They might have, metaphors might be applied to them, but they have no inherent narrative other than what any individual match kind of, brings to it.
Man, we're having this conversation, huh?
Yeah, we're deep into it. I'm just kind of going. I'm sorry.
Is this about to happen? No, I'm perfectly happy jumping in, but this is like, this is one of those. This is one of the biggies in our industry, I'd say, in our medium.
It is. Yeah.
What was his motivation for? I haven't read the article. Why was he proposing this?
I will look.
Something tricked him up.
I don't remember what it was, what the specific thing was. So I will have to look.
There's a trigger, though.
There was a trigger. Oh, yeah, here it is. Video games are better about stories. Oh, he's talking about Edith Finch, which is What Remains of Edith Finch, which is a largely narrative-based game.
Yeah.
It's an indie title. It's from Giant Sparrow, who made the Swan. What's the Swan?
The Unfinished Swan.
The Unfinished Swan.
Yeah. Which I think one of the Naughty Dog folks went there. Who is it? Yeah, I think somebody left Naughty Dog to go join that studio, I believe.
I think you're right, actually.
Yeah, which was a narrative-centric person, so I can see how that one would be the follow-up. Because Unfinished One was much more abstract and mechanics-based and level design-based, right? Portal-esque. And it's... I don't know. I mean, I guess to jump in, I get it. I mean, does it matter though?
I'm not. Yeah. Ultimately, I kind of come down there.
It's like if
I was trying to think of counterexamples in a certain way. Okay, I'm a game designer. I'm not maybe a good enough game designer to come up with Go, something that's going to last for thousands of years. So I do my best, and I come up with a game. And my example I'm thinking of, actually, right off the bat, is, okay, I'm going to make a nice little puzzler. A nice little platformer. And I'm like, I'm going to fool with this. I'm going to have the player control a character. All right, you know what? Here's an innovation. I'm going to make the player control multiple characters. The thing is, I really stink at art, so I'm going to work with some polygons, some rectangles, and make them kind of different sizes or shapes a little bit. I'm going to try to see what I can make out of that. And over time, I kind of, I'm finding this kind of interesting, but it just doesn't have that hook. So now I make the boxes, and I start to add a narrative layer on of what they are is their AIs trying to escape a mainframe. And now I've got Thomas Was Alone.
Mm-hmm.
And as a whole experience, Thomas Was Alone is very enjoyable. I've played through it a couple times. If it were just the boxes, and the platforming, I probably wouldn't have made it through it.
Yeah.
actually, if it were just the boxes and just the words, not the narration, but just the story, I probably still wouldn't have. But as a whole package, it's a nice little gem. It's whatever,
it's a marriage.
Yeah. I mean, going and putting all those elements together, makes a nice grotty stew, as one of our old guests would say. I don't know. It's not like that any one of them is going to stand the test of time. Like, I don't remember all the names of the boxes and whatever. I mean, sure, I'm obviously Thomas. And I like James, too, who's the one that goes the opposite direction, I think. But, fundamentally, I'm not going to remember all their names. So it's not a great story. It's not an amazing story that changed my life, and it's not amazing gameplay that, changed how I look at games. But it's a pretty good experience that I quite enjoyed, and I don't know, sometimes that's all you can hope for.
I mean, is another way, not having, being a little bit, unprepared in this way, but not having read Ian's piece, but is another way to say what he's maybe trying to say or meaning to say is that if you're, which I'm trying to kind of, your Thomas is Alone example, kind of trying to riff off of that, if you're essentially, just to boil it down, if your gameplay experience is not meshed well with your narrative experience, or they are maybe even contradicting each other or something like that, then maybe why bother? But I mean, I feel like I feel like the goal. No,
I think he's saying something stronger than that. I mean, I think fundamentally the thing is
to be controversial, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think for one thing he's a little contrarian, but the other thing is that he is a guy from from knowing a little bit of his work, he's been really interested in what's called object-oriented ontology for a while, which is a whole philosophical thing. I'm not going to go into it. But really what he's trying to say is the inherent activity that you're doing, if you really take it seriously, and this is kind of the focus of his book, Play Anything, more recently, if you really take it seriously, there's real depth in anything. If you take it earnestly and whatever. So, maybe it's enough to go into the sort of puzzle platformer and just take with the boxes and no narrative, and just take that thing as far as you can go. Maybe even further, and just forever, And, I mean, he's the sort of guy who wants to walk, for 6 months, I remember on Twitter, he talked about pressure sprayers. And you're just like, Ian, what is it with the pressure sprayers already? Just, what are you talking about? But he was so, he earnestly dives into these individual things. So I don't want to sidetrack away from Planescape Torment into eternally, but I think the whole narrative versus systems and all that stuff question is something that really comes to mind for me, especially prompted by Anthony's email, which we probably won't read, Anthony, sorry, just because we kind of used it as a jumping off point. Yeah, but he was saying how rich this area is with all this stuff, things that I was kind of talking about. And it made me think about, okay, I love that about this area, and yet if this were Baldur's Gate and it were that, I would be tearing my hair out and skip most of it. I'd be like, yeah, whatever. I don't,
Yeah, well, maybe, but if that was written well and interesting and unexpected, and you were still in the Sword Coast, a town on the Sword Coast, you might have done them. I mean, I just,
I'd probably do them because I needed the mechanical benefit, which was to say the XP, so that I wouldn't die in the next fight.
But you think if they were just as well written and just as interesting, and say there was a town in the middle of Baldur's Gate that was which there probably is, and I'm forgetting, Baldur's Gate 2 went to some whatever, I don't even remember that game, basically, but there's a town in the middle...
Yeah, we should play it next. Kidding. I'm totally kidding.
Man, that's probably, that's like a 200-hour game, I don't know.
Yeah, no way.
That is I don't know, maybe it goes to the planes, right? It technically could, because it's in the same system, right? D&D system. And there's just a bunch of wacky stuff happens there, and there's a bunch of fetch quests, and maybe even the same shop that is in the Clerk's ward. And it's just so wacky and interesting and different that you are compelled. I mean, just because, like you said earlier, you already answered it. It's like the narrative and the writing is what's making you do this.
Sure.
Because it's like I want to see what happens.
But right? I mean, I think that there are people for whom that doesn't hold. I mean, I think you and I are probably more on the narrative.
No, totally. I agree. But then it's not for them. Like, that's okay.
Yeah.
Like it's the audience will decide. That's my. I mean, it's like things. Sometimes they don't find an audience, of course, right? Things fall through the cracks for various reasons. But if they find enough of an audience, like the audience will speak, right? I mean, they will resonate, and some people just like stories. They want a story to be told to them, and I know you're not necessarily agreeing with Ian or whatever or what have you, but I think it is very appropriate conversation for Planescape specifically, because what I was going to say earlier to your point about like the curiosity shop is just, and I hope we can talk to somebody about this, but clearly one of their pillars, whether it was through necessity, like we talked about in our first episode or not, was to overemphasize narrative and writing and storytelling over D&D mechanics and systems, right? Like they just don't. Combat is a joke for the most part. There's not that much of it. It's mainly an adventure game that we're playing with puzzles and solutions. And that was just a choice they made. But I think it made it unique compared to Icewind Dale or other things, which are shallow in their story, but try to have more interesting mechanical things happening and combat systems happening. But I mean, it's just different, right? I mean,
yeah.
And it's compelled you to, I don't know. I feel like I'm getting preachy on.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely all that stuff grabbed me, and I'm just trying to bring up the kind of counterpoint to that of like,
there's value.
There'd be value in like. I guess part of my point is like if there were a more complicated. Actual interaction system of some kind, like between me and NPCs, instead of like pick a number, for example. Like if I could actually, it's not this game, and I'm kind of not finding fault with that. But like if I could actually, I don't know, piss people off by my alignment, or whatever, by the stories they've heard about me, or whatever. Like if I had done something horrible down there, I mean, I guess other games kind of have done that.
Yeah, people have dabbled with that stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like the mechanics are pretty thin, even in the dialogue. Like all the mechanics in the game are thin gruel, and what they do is put just this amazing density of rich reading experience, and I'm a reader, right? I mean, I read a lot of books, so it appeals to me, right? It doesn't, it doesn't bother me at all. And if Baldur's Gate or Icewind Dale or whatever, I mean, certainly I enjoyed Dragon Age Inquisition because of all these relationships with these secondary characters, your sort of companions that you build up, and you can do tons of quests with them. That explore those stories. Like, I love that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think that that's been a great direction that RPGs have taken. And I think it sort of starts here, to be honest. With BioWare games in particular. And
I think BioWare.
Legacy, but they started it with Baldur's Gate.
And then, BioWare and Interplay both, I think, were really pushing the boundaries of this stuff. And we talked a lot about it in the Fallout series, right? And I think to your point, like Fallout maybe for me represents a better balance and marriage of systems and mechanics and narrative, right? Where there's enough interest in both, and you can really
I would totally agree.
Your choices really impact narrative, and like you said, the way that you and even your character creation, as we talked about in the series, I believe, can have a really big impact on how people treat you, right? Which I think, other than the Nameless One's backstory and the mystery of that, though I am noticing some of your companions and how, depending on who you have, those really impact some of your interactions in some interesting ways. So I wish they kind of did more of that. But yeah, other than the mystery of the background, like your RPG choices don't really impact things much, which is we talked about this, I think, a little bit a couple episodes ago, of just like that kind of concept of playing as a character in an RPG versus your own avatar, like Witcher versus Dragon Age or something.
Right.
And the differences and difficulties of that, but also when you're playing as a character, then it does limit you on some of the variety and wide range of sort of ways that things can go for you, because kind of because in Geralt in Witcher, right? Like, because even the fact that he's a Witcher changes the way people interact with him, and you as a player can't change that fact.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of what holds back the mechanical interest of this game is partly reflected in D&D. I've been playing this for quite a while now. I'm like level 7 or 8. Like, so your opportunities for change are infrequent, and maybe we should talk about classes and retraining and stuff like that, because I actually haven't retrained as anything else. But
yeah,
you rarely have opportunities to really change a lot about yourself, especially if you're playing a
yeah. It's barely an RPG.
Yeah, it really is from that standpoint. And furthermore, I almost never change my equipment. Like, that just seems bizarre to me. I bought this axe, this enchanted battle axe that I've been using from a skeleton in the Dead Nations, I believe, the skeleton merchant. I think that's where I bought that. I know that's where I bought that because I needed something for the wererats. So, and that's the last time I actually changed what I'm fighting with.
What difficulty are you playing
on? There are multiple sliders for difficulty. I did dial down the combat difficulty just so that I could catch up.
Yeah, I did too.
And I haven't dialed it back up. So.
No, I put it. I basically, and I'm not sure. I might do some tests to crank it up to see how different things really are tactically. So that definitely.
I do remember my original playthrough that in some of the combat there was a lot more. I also have turned it on so that if anybody's seriously hurt, it just pauses automatically. And then I might make decisions and like pull people back, and that happened quite a bit in the Modron maze, which, like I said, we'll talk about next time, whether or not you've gotten to it, but or if you found your way in. So I know dangling that sweet Tim nip for you, but yeah, I mean it was it just is strange to me to like to play. I've been playing the Darksiders games again, and those games are so crazy with a million different things that you can equip. You're constantly upgrading your weapons so that you do more damage or whatever, and have other side benefits. And like none of that is here.
Yeah, and then to play this game where you would expect that to happen, but
exactly right. That's just like a straight up adventure that's more like a Zelda game in ways, but it has a ton of this like hack and slash component. And this is missing all the hack and slash component.
Yeah.
Which, given the underlying system, that's kind of what you expected from these. Certainly back in 1999 or whatever.
Yeah, it's funny how I'm reflecting now. I think it's really a great game to play for the podcast, and I'm obviously still very glad we're playing it. But I guess my memory was different. Or we already know my memory's bad anyway, but my recollection of this game is turning out to be very different now that we're playing it, in that I feel like I wanted, personally I wanted us to play an Infinity Engine game to talk about that sort of like category of game. But in a way, this really is its own thing, right? It really doesn't have a lot in common with the rest of the games when you think about all the different other aspects that it really isn't leveraging. I think it's making good discussion, but it's just, I guess I'm just caught off guard by that, and kind of revisiting that and remembering that as we're playing, is very interesting. It's actually made me want to go back and play and refresh my memory on Baldur's Gate or Icewind Dale or something, just to kind of see where
that's coming from.
Yeah, and how different things really.
I remember Baldur's Gate being more tactical, and in terms of like the combat, actually doing a lot of pausing. And
I feel like the only reason that would be the case, though, is if it were more difficult, right? I mean, because the systems are the same. Well, I guess the enemy design would definitely.
Well, I mean, I think there's more combat, and maybe you may be right that there might be. Like, I definitely remember Icewind Dale had a Heart of Winter mode, which was like insanely difficult. That I tried for a while. Never made it through on that. I don't think I made it out of the first town. It was like the first encounter, I'm getting killed. Which was like, okay, you want hard, gamers? Yeah. Here we got it for you here. Every millisecond of this fight is going to matter, so you really need to think about what you're doing.
Yeah, I think it was the Diablo influence, right? Hell mode and stuff like that. At that time, they were trying
probably.
to.
I mean, but I do remember. I definitely do remember that. I agree.
My memory is
just hard for me to.
My memory is that it was more tactical as well. Yeah. And I think it's very interesting and cool.
It might have been just that the AI, the choices that the AI would have made would have been more interesting. I mean, this game does come out fairly quickly after Baldur's Gate, and of course Baldur's Gate was being done by BioWare. This engine was not complete, as we talked about last time when it was handed over. So there's a good chance that they really didn't have the tools to make the combat super interesting, and then invested their time and energy elsewhere.
Right.
It could make a real big difference.
Yeah, I feel like combat-wise, my vague memory is that Icewind Dale 2 probably was the best that they had, that like the most refined from a combat perspective. Maybe Baldur's Gate 2 as well, but I feel like Baldur's Gate 2 is just kind of unfocused. But I don't know. It's just been very intriguing to go through it, and I forgot to mention, like earlier, one of the things I was going to mention when it comes to like kind of coming full circle to this concept of narrative in this game, and your point about like depth mechanics, and kind of coming back around to my point about like kind of the what's driving you is the narrative or driving a player in this game, right? And just like if you that either resonates with you or not, and me getting stuck on all the sort of variables and permutations and all the proper nouns and stuff. One takeaway that I'm taking away from playing this, as we talk about the extremes of like the one extreme of being completely systemic, and maybe like as Ian's talking about, like going deep into the gameplay aspect of it in the stories that you would tell coming from that, versus this which is focused most exclusively on the narrative centric. But myself working currently on a franchise that also has a lot of proper nouns and a lot of deep lore and backstory, and we talk about that a lot, and just kind of being careful that isn't that there isn't a preconceived notion that that's the right way to lean. That you have to have a balance of, because it's obviously, and we get criticized for it, and we talk about it a lot. Like I said, it's obviously going to be less usable by more people, right? The deeper you go into that stuff. And the weird thing about this particular game is this isn't a fifth of the series. This is the first game, and it's already hitting you with all of this opaque stuff, that's really hard to get through and remember. But as far as like finding that balance of making sure that there are tropes, and that there are things that are going to be preconceived notions that you don't have to explain to people, and find common themes and kind of story mechanics or myths or something, that people will resonate with, that don't have to be re-explained every time you talk to somebody. I don't know, just reflecting on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think when we talk about mazes, I think if you look at the theme of the game as maybe being at least in part about mazes, whether that's a maze of identity, or if that's just literalized in actual mazes that you're constantly running into, like even going down into the underground, it's kind of a maze, but the bigger maze is really,
a maze of fetch quests.
Well, I was going to say the bigger maze really is this maze of connections you got to tease out, like in the brothel.
Oh man,
of intellectual.
The 10
lusts or whatever. Yeah, with the 10 different.
when she said go and talk to my 10 disciples, I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Yeah. There's 10 of them? And I knew that each of them was going to be 22 minutes to a half hour of talking, right? And I was like, wow. And yeah, so anyway, yeah. I mean, it's very intriguing, and every one of them is interesting, but... And then I believe one of them must have to do with finding Ravel, right?
That's correct.
And so I'm close to that, but...
You might even say Ravel. She pronounces it really oddly.
Ravel? Is that how they say it?
When Ravel herself says it, I think she says Ravel.
Oh, okay, yeah. I loved, by the way, the in the private sensorium, is that how you say it? Yep. The one gem... Mm-hmm. That you talked when you're basically kind of talking to her, but I guess kind of in the past or I don't know what that was.
Yeah, that's a really weird moment. I actually loved all the sensorium stuff. Those
were great. Those were great. I wanted to segue too when we get a chance before we end tonight of just some favorite moments because they're just so.
Well, let's do it now because I think probably we should take a break before too much longer. Yeah.
yeah. That was that whole little sequence there. Really quick, before I forget, with the candy, did you talk to Quell before going to the Curiosity Shop, or did you go to the Curiosity Shop?
I did not, actually. I went to the Curiosity Shop.
Interesting. Okay, so
I had a ton of stuff in my inventory, or spread amongst my characters, maybe, because I had a ton of money, and I just was like, I'll just buy everything I can buy, because I know I'm going to need most of this stuff.
So did somebody, I forgot who told me, but somebody previously... Quite a long time ago, told me to go to the clerk's ward to talk to Quell. Yeah,
it was Lothar.
Lothar? Huh. Yeah, maybe. So. Yeah, I don't remember that. Maybe. Okay. So because that's when I got to the clerk's ward, I went directly there and talked to him. Okay, so interesting. So you found the candy first, but didn't...
Lothar is the skull guy.
Oh, the guy that took the skull?
That took Morte, yeah.
Yeah. Which also... So going back to the last episode on that, needle in the haystack, when you needed to go find the skull, how did you find the right skull?
So I went, and I ended up... my plan was to go and take the skull of the king, because he was dead anyway.
That was my original plan, too. I thought, yep, okay.
So I went in to use the portal.
The Silent King, you're saying?
The Silent King, right.
Which I couldn't figure out how to get back in there.
Exactly. And so I talked to Stale Mary.
Oh. And you could use the portal again?
Nope. And Stale Mary was like...
Nope.
No, I told her what I was up to and what I was trying to do, and she's like, well, just have my head.
Are you serious?
Yep. She's like, I'm done, really. And she takes off her own head and gives it to you.
There are multiple heads.
There's multiple heads, I bet. So whose head did you get?
That's what I was asking about.
Oh, yeah, so you must have gotten Soego because you were asking about him.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I assumed that Harkrim would have been one. The Chancellor, the big scary skeleton-looking dude.
Yeah. Yeah, he could have been. I mean, you probably could.
He was my next choice after the Silent King. I was like, well, that other obvious skull guy, would probably be the one to go after.
Multiple skulls, interesting. Yeah, so at first I just scoured to find some skulls that I had left laying around, and assumed those weren't going to work. But that was just kind of the needle in the haystack. That was the particular quest that needle in the haystack thing came up for me. So after the Silent King didn't work, I thought to myself, God, that Silent Mary or the Stale Mary thing is hilarious to me.
Yeah,
I wonder what other heads there are. Anyway, Silent King didn't work. I went to go talk to Hazrim or whatever his name was, thinking that might be something. But then that jogged my memory that I still hadn't finished the quest, the side quest of doing something with what's his name? Soego that he wants Soego out of there. Right? There's a quest where it's like Hagrid wants a Soego out of there, and so can you help him do that? That was the side quest,
I see.
I never figured that out. But then I remembered there was a sarcophagus in Soego's room. So I thought, I wonder if that you can interact with, but it wouldn't let you open it while Soego was in the room. So I thought, maybe there's a skeleton in there, and I can get a skull of importance inside that sarcophagus.
Sarcophagus, yeah.
And so I was like, okay, so now I'm going to go finish this quest. So kill 2 birds with 1 stone, make the mage guy happy, or the leader guy happy, and then take care, and maybe something's inside there that's interesting. So couldn't figure that out. So I was like, well, I'll just kill Soego and get him out of the way that way. Turns out Soego, spoiler alert, is a wererat in disguise.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the solution is actually to kill him because he's been basically a spy for the Rat Nation. And I think in the sarcophagus wasn't really anything. There's a journal or something that wasn't that important. But when you kill him, you get his head.
Yeah.
And it's a human head. In at least the artwork is.
Or where human head.
It looks like a human head.
Yeah, he's going to look like a human because he's a dust man undercover.
Yeah, exactly. But when you kill him, he turns back to the wererat for a second. Anyway, so funny. I gave him that head, and got Morte back that way.
That's cool. Okay, so here are the other options.
Oh yeah,
I've looked it up. There are 6.
What?
You can get a Costa or a Caste, who is, I believe, the ghoul lady.
The ghoul lady, yeah.
Trying to talk about that stuff.
Which is, I think, Greek. I think that is...
Yeah, it sounds like Yocasta, right?
Yeah, that's Antigone's sister, I think, yeah.
Hargrim.
Okay, you can get his,
the Chancellor, yeah. Mantuak, I don't know if you remember him.
That rings a bell.
He's a wererat in the
below
the Rat Nation.
Right below, actually, in the
Wards of
Lothar guy.
Yeah. Yes, near there. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you talked to him there. The Silent King you can get.
Oh,
it says.
Wow, I wonder how.
Pickpocket the key from Hargrim. Kill Hargrim. Take the key. Attack the skeletons.
The guards?
Still Mary, but you can't. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna do that.
Wow, that's cool. Interesting.
And then the final one is Still Mary. It's Soego. Soego. Good God! It's like I said, alphabet soup. And then Still Mary.
Soego. Yeah, who knows? Yeah, interesting. That's so funny. Well, so I guess it's a little better when the needle is multiple needles.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Rather than multiple haystacks, which is what kind of happens when you can go to all the maps. It's like, where do I go find
multiple? Totally. Yep.
Yeah, no, I really like that's that broad. That's really funny. That was one of my favorite moments. Was like Morte getting stolen. I also. For me, I did get mazed by the Lady of Pain, and that was a great moment because
sounds cool.
I was not expecting that in the least.
Yeah,
so that was a pretty good moment. Just like a totally unexpected thing.
I like I like Dimitri the zombie. Did you see him? He's up, I think, in the lower wards. He's working for the Coffinmaker, I think.
Oh yes, I remember that. Yeah,
and the Coffinmaker doesn't know he's a zombie. It's a great,
that's
great conversation, and as you're trying to negotiate with him, it's sort of like, this guy's a zombie, right?
Yeah.
And he's a Coffinmaker. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was just some great.
Yeah, I went in there explicitly to look for a tombstone for this guy's city.
Oh yeah. No,
and I couldn't pick any of those up, and maybe I'll go. Excuse me, maybe I'll go back there. But
I solved that one.
Oh, you did? Okay. Yeah, I have that one open. And I have one open that I'll never close, and I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but there was one where it's like, I can't. I was super irritated.
Oh, you mean...
And there's a quest, like we talked about maybe the first episode, like there's a quest item that I won't...
Impossible
that I don't think I can do.
The tombstone one is really interesting, I think. I won't spoil it for you, but the solution to that, I think I just got lucky and put 2 and 2 together in that case, but pretty, I would say that's one of my favorite moments too.
Well, and my other favorite moment, which I know was one of yours, was the Alley of Lingering Sighs.
Yes, right. Couldn't believe it.
The pregnant wall.
Couldn't believe it. Yep. And then just like giving birth to a city, basically.
Yeah. I'm just gonna give birth to another block. Here's some buildings, and there's a nice cutscene where those just kind of grow.
Yeah.
You're like, what? This game?
Yeah. And then the weird aspect of like, in order for that to happen, you had to kill the Dabus that was.
Yes.
Dabus? Is that yeah?
Yeah, Dabus.
Dabus. That was repairing the city, right? Keeping it repaired. So, I don't know. I want to think more about like what metaphor is going on there. I feel like there's some message in there that I missed, but it felt like they were trying to say something with that little mini storyline there, of like, I don't know, like a band-aiding. I don't know, like just giving, I don't know. It weirded me out a little bit, to be honest, of sort of like giving birth, but that this thing is being prevented from giving birth for some reason, and then this other thing is like mending these wounds. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, there's not a clear...
Something awkward about that metaphorically. Yeah.
I'm not sure... I mean, I guess what it could be is a sort of libertarian saying about how growth is restricted by regulation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, laissez-faire.
Yeah, but that's the kind of the...
Yeah, maybe.
That's the best thing to do. All right,
good.
Well, what do you say? We take a quick break, and then we'll come back and hit a few pieces of email?
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. This week we're going to read a few emails. We had a lot of email this week. Some of it we're not going to read because it gets covered by somebody else. And I'll try to shout out to those folks at that time. But the email was starting to stack up a little bit, and I want to make sure we got to it. So we won't read any more reviews. I will say that we are very close at the time of recording to our 75 review before the drawing. And I think it's likely, if you folks get out there and review this week, that you will have a shot next week at the drawing. So that is something I hope we'll be able to do next time. So apologies that we're not going to read any reviews this time because there's a bunch of emails with questions, and we need to get through some of them before we're done with this whole topic. So, Tim, you've got the first one. This was sent to devgameclub@gmail.com.
Okay, so this one is from Joao, I believe, though he's Brazilian, and has said in his email, which I am going to start now, "Hello, Brett and Tim. If you're wondering how to pronounce my weird Brazilian name, don't bother, call me John. That's the perk of biblical names. They translate well.
I will say João Vitor Bispo Galvão. That's how I'm going to say it.
Okay, good job. This is great work you guys do. You're insightful and knowledgeable, and I simply love your show structure. Breaking every game down into multiple episodes really allows you to be thorough while avoiding becoming tiresome. It's my favorite part of an overall great show, and as long as you keep it up, I'm going to keep listening. Quick couple of questions. After hearing Tim, I guess, in parentheses, talking about how specialized some professionals in development can get in one of the A Link to the Past episodes, I started to wonder how common it is to find people who are not at all into games, working in the industry over there. You know, guys who won't be found playing games, talking about games or hosting podcasts about game design on their free time. Is it common? Is it a job on game development already as promising as other careers for programming, for programmers, artists, writers, etc.? Or is game dev still a niche that only passionate people want anything to do with? Has it changed over time, and if so, how?
I would say we can probably cut it there. That probably is. I think that probably gets the real meat of it all. And then he says thanks again, and et cetera. So, I mean, my perspective is that it has definitely changed, and B, I have some thoughts about why. But I'm curious what you think about that, Tim.
What is he asking exactly?
He's sort of asking, like, do only people who are passionate about games
get into it? Games? Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, that is a good question. Yeah, it has changed.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start. I mean, one of the things is that early on in my career, salary-wise, you know, game development was way lower than what I might have made doing other sorts of things. But what attracted me to it as a programmer was that the challenges in games were the most interesting challenges I could think of out there to pursue. You know, because it ends up using both, and I started as a gameplay programmer, so it uses kind of both parts of my brain, the sort of intellectual rigor, math kind of stuff that's, you know, and logic and all that programming requires, but also having to creatively evaluate, you know, whether or not this leads to fun, you know, whether or not this code that I'm writing is something that either is already fun or that somebody can make fun, you know, through manipulating the data hooks that I'm giving them or whatever. So there's a lot of kind of just inherently interesting, tough questions. And so I was kind of, you know, trading off on my passion, you know, for that and getting that out of the job. And I think that was pretty common at the time. Certainly at LucasArts, it seemed it was that way.
Yeah, I think I definitely hear consistently, especially from engineers, that salary is usually one of the things that would keep somebody from joining compared to what they can get other places. But the other thing that I feel like I've seen happen over time is you see somebody who actually was specializing in computer science in college and then did get a pretty good job coming out of college and in applications or some non-game development way, location company, and over time they got bored or kind of like realized that they had achieved their goal, but they were lacking some sort of creative, as Brett said, creative side of it, or interacting with creatives in a different way. But and maybe had an inkling about games. Maybe they were a casual game or something, but just wanted to change, So I feel like I've heard a handful of people just kind of like, yeah, I used to work in banking, or I used to work, especially at Microsoft right now. Like we get people coming over from Windows and Office, right, who join up because they want to work on games because they're just tired of just doing that kind of stuff. And I think the trick is that it then becomes to be careful what you wish for, because games are so weird and so different. Uncertain. And so unpredictable and different every time, and just crazy and just insane, And so that kind of like the discipline and rigor and consistency you get from, I assume, not having worked on an applications team, from applications and obviously different problems to solve and still difficult in their own way, but it's just so very different. So you then see people go back when they realize how crazy games are.
Yeah, I think with games, with applications development in particular, for programmers and even for sort of design people and that, I think you have still in a lot of industry a lot more what we'd call waterfall development, which is you have a spec and then you do a design, and then you start to implement and then you test and whatever, and it's a straight line, and it's all very understood. Like adding this business rule will take this much time, adding this user interface element will take this much time. The problem is that we have no idea up front, often exactly, unless we're straight up copying something else, which really nobody does to a large degree anymore, at least in the AAA industry. We're figuring all this stuff out as we go, and
can be maddening.
So, yeah, but now on the other hand, though, I do think that there are a lot of factors that might entice people who are not passionate about games into games, and then B, just over time, people just might just develop other things in their lives, right, that take up so much time. I mean, we have a hard time finding time to play games every week. This podcast kind of focuses us in that way, but we're not necessarily playing a ton of other games at the moment because we're doing the podcast. Just because we have other responsibilities, we have children, and relationships we're in, and all that stuff, plus work, it all adds up, and it's hard to play a ton. So there's that. But then the other thing too is that, if you're say a 3D artist or even an animator, there's not necessarily tons of industries that are out there that have interesting work for you. And I don't think you need to be interested in games themselves to want to make really great art for games or to animate really interesting things for games. You might also be interested in that case in the film industry or
we get a lot of crossover with film for art on the art side of things, with the exception of a couple things, like maybe not environment art often is different and stuff, but character art and animation and effects and things, like we definitely have a lot of crossover there. And in fact, where I work, we have a lot of people that have come from the film industry. I think most of the time they have some game interest though, and there's some background coming in that, but they're specialists coming in. And then I guess art and production both, you see some crossover there. I think the one to his question as far as like niche and people who really are focused on doing video games specifically, like design is the one area that I was going to echo. You're really not going to get them coming from another industry, or like they are specialists. They want to be doing that thing. They want to be designers. That's really all they're qualified to, like they can't leave and go work on film, right? You can't leave and go work in another industry.
It's not easy or obvious how you would do it.
No, for most, especially gameplay, right? But maybe you can migrate. I actually know a guy that migrated over pretty successfully to board games, right? But still, you're in games for the most part, and then writers, cross over a little bit, quite a bit more. But design's the weird one, I'd say, and all that really kind of one-stop shop or one possibility.
Yeah, so I do think it has changed to kind of tighten it all up here at the end. I do think it has changed over time, and it was much more the case when we started that it was entirely passionate people because, of course, budgets were lower, the market was smaller. That all started to explode around the time we joined the industry and has only grown since, and has proved to be moderately recession-proof. I think everything got hit a bit by the recession of 2008. And with that growth, there's been a need for more skilled people, and when you have a need for more skilled people, then you offer higher salaries and things like that, and it ends up bringing in people who maybe aren't necessarily devoted and have a calling to do this sort of work. So, and I think that's fine. There's a lot of different reasons to want to explore your creative skills, and getting well paid for them is certainly one of them. I wouldn't begrudge anyone that. So, thank you, Joao. I have a question from Aaron Evers, and that sounds like your real name. He starts with "Hi, gents," and a few things. He says, "You can thank Jason Schreier for the shout-out last year, and I've been listening ever since." And some fun tidbits he learned, like the invincible Darth Vader being killed by a clever QA person, or Medivh being hammered on the keys. And he likes the mix of technical and behind-the-scenes stories we share. Anyway, his question, he says, involves an article I read some time ago about how beautiful Carmack's Doom 3 code is, which just also happens to be on Kotaku. Jason did not put me up to this. He gives a link, and I'll share that in the show notes. He says, is it rare to see something like that in the game dev world? How much of a focus is on how the code looks and reads, or is that not even a concern for game devs? I wonder if that is something unique to Carmack or not. He says, thanks for the time in the cast. Let me know when I can buy an Aw Geez t-shirt. Aw Geez t-shirts. Actually, Fargo being a big thing on TV.
There's probably a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah, that's where I got Tim's Aw Geez t-shirt. It was tied in with Fargo. But anyway, I did actually reread that article, which I remembered when it came out. And this question's mostly for me, I guess. So sorry, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of like code beauty, I mean, that's in the eye of the beholder, certainly. I would say the most important thing for code when you're on a team of engineers is that it be readable by the other humans on your team. And a lot of the things that are discussed in that article are really nice practices, in terms of like, how do you name things and how do you know just looking at this, what's called the signature of a function, which is to say the things that go into it and the things that come out of it, what it does and, what can you learn from that information just looking at it. And a lot of, designs of interfaces and things like that are all about making your code easy for other people to use. And that other person might be you in 6 months, because any code I wrote 6 months ago is basically foreign to me because I've written so much in the meantime. That said, it is not necessarily different programmers vary quite widely on how much they care about things like this. I've always kind of cared a little bit more. I would say, I was very lucky to start my career on Starfighter with two other engineers in particular who were very like-minded in terms of how we organized the code, Chris Corey and Andrew Kermsey. We were like three peas in a pod as far as how we thought code should be written and what it should look like, and we could easily jump into any of the other people's code and just do stuff and be effective. It was a really extraordinary and rare kind of thing, because then I moved to like Unreal, and not only did I have the folks working at LucasArts, but we also had this code base we got from Unreal that we were all knocking around in, and then further on from there. And I've seen lots of different code bases. So I would say it is somewhat rare to see something like Carmack's code. But I also think it's a nice ideal that we should all aspire to, just because in many ways it is very clear and easy to read. I've certainly seen later id Tech engines, and they're all pretty well organized and easy to read. Some parts better than others, but that's always the case. So yeah, I would say it is kind of rare. I've been exposed to only a handful of studios. But everybody does try to organize their code at least a little bit and agree on some ways that they're going to make the code look, just to make it easier to go in and work on something else. So there you have it, Aaron. Thanks for your question. You had another one, sir.
Yes, this is from Timothy Homan. Correct?
Yes. Knows if it's real name.
Yes, it might not be. Is he a human? Is he Homan?
I see what you did there.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the discussion on the podcast this week, Planescape Torment Part 3, later on about systemic versus handcrafted. Okay, so this is where this is going, right? This is the macro topic. Yep. Ever since the Final Fantasy, he has 10 here, but 9 episodes you guys did. You brought to my attention a gap I had noticed, but not really thought through with this split, embodied most of all with the difference between JRPGs and Western RPGs generally. I've loved many Western RPG games over the years, but the cost of freedom in many of these Western RPGs has never been ultimately worth it. For me, the only time those games ever achieved the highs of a game with a focused character is when they go overboard with the little details. I think the character origins in Dragon Age Origins are a very strong example in that they set up initial character motivations and even tie in all sorts of characters throughout the rest of the game. A certain lower level evil noble, for example, becomes very significant if your character is a human noble, for example, as he is set up as a villain working against your family, and further motivation and detail is added. I think it's telling that the Dragon Age series went away from this as the games went on. It must have been incredibly time-consuming to do all of that content, and ultimately there is that water cooler cost you guys bring up that may not really add much for any given player. However, I think there is certainly an effect for the player in seeing branching, even if they do not engage with it all. For example, Deus Ex is one of my favorite games. Agreed, sir. We'll probably play that at some point. I may always prefer certain routes, but seeing that there are such a large amount of possibilities creates such a complete, real feeling to that world and your role in it. The kill phrases for enemy agents are one of my favorite hidden things to find in the game, and although I found them in the very first playthrough and was always used them, the fact that I can see you may not find them and have to deal with them, having to deal with things without them, still does add appreciation for me as a player of a game I'm playing. There are many issues I have with the follow-ups. Deus Ex, I assume he's saying, but the first is that there really aren't as many possibilities, and you can very easily see them all. It feels shallow then and predictable. So while I agree with much of the discussion, I do think, for me at least, Brett was underselling the impact of choice and freedom, even if you aren't discussing it with friends. I see where he's going. I was nodding my head when Tim brought up Witcher 3 because in my mind it's the pinnacle of doing both in an RPG. There's a staggering amount of detail in crafted bits, sometimes surprising stuff that you might not expect. There are cool systems and open world stuff done in a way that feels on par with open world games like Red Dead. The choices are still dramatically different. I appreciate the freedom of a Bethesda game, but to me, small gains in player choice are rarely worth it for what games like Deus Ex and Witcher manage with their specific characters. It is probably the number one area I hope Bethesda games expand because it has made me really feel more and more like Tim over the years when he was thinking about bouncing off of those games. Wow, yeah, good insight there, sir.
Yeah, a lot to chew on there. I actually wanted to shout out to both Kurt Strock and Chris Mead, if those are their real names, because we also had feedback from them about how we kind of went off script. We don't actually have a script. we do kind of kick around what we'd like to talk about, and we just kind of fumbled our way into this conversation last week, and again this week with some story.
We're always off script
stuff. But yeah, we're not scripted in any way. Because Tim would never say some of the baffling things that he says. But yeah, I mean the RPGs in particular, and this is a huge dump of RPGs. I do remember with Dragon Age Origins being kind of curious about how all those were going to tie back into the main story. I maybe found them a little more, a little less specific, but it may have been the ones I chose. I do remember feeling like, oh, here's going to be this catastrophic event where everybody in town dies, and that's going to, give me motivation to go on this revenge quest, maybe, or even just to go figure out what's going on. And it was kind of a chosen one story, I think. I don't remember it all that well, but I think it was.
I didn't. I actually haven't played it, to be honest.
Yeah, I played it. I should have played it on the PC. I played that on a console, and it was not. I think it was a little bit.
Yeah, bad choice. Yeah, I think Tim is. we are of the same mind for sure, because I feel the same way about Deus Ex and Bethesda games, as he has summarized for himself, and it sounds like we're of like minds on Witcher 3 specifically. But there's a right balance, I think, to that, and with the Bethesda game specifically. I think Fallout 3 is the only one I've finished completely. I mean, I played a lot of that game, but the
me too.
The yeah, right. You played it.
No, actually, I finished Oblivion.
No, I thought you meant you played a lot of that game. Yeah,
I did play a lot of that game, but I also did finish it.
I guess to his point, like, the water cooler talk around that game was definitely cool, but I was always bummed that I guess I'll say the narrative water cooler talk versus the systemic water cooler talk, that tended to be pretty similar to each other, right? It really only came down to, did you find or do a specific quest, not really what you did with it, with a couple exceptions, like, okay, you blow up, you can blow up, what's it called, or save at the first town.
Right,
Megaton. There were some big ones like that, but for the most part, like, it was, there wasn't just a lot of in-depth variability to those kinds of choices on how you're going to outcome. Occasionally, like, somebody would say, oh, I took out that faction, and another person would say, well, I helped them. But, like, that was kind of the depth of it. It was more of just, like, there was so much of it, and what did you find? And that's where, like, the water cooler talk would be like, oh, I didn't even know that existed, or whatever, right? But I feel like with Witcher, his point about, like, kind of having enough of that direction. I guess I covered this in the last episode, really, just that kind of having enough direction from the character, and then having some of the depth in the way that you're playing that character and the choices you're making, and the outcomes being pretty interesting. I think it's actually also just a really well planned out and well written game, Witcher 3 is, and so the Bloody Baron quest and things like that people really harken back to. And I also very much agree with the Deus Ex style of, like, yes, there's water cooler talk, but there's also just, even if you talk to nobody about the game, the fact that that there's options and you may not use them. And we talked about this, I bet, even in System Shock 2 when we played that in the first series.
Yeah.
It just gives you a sense of a really fulfilled place, and really fully realized place, and even though you may not use all that stuff. So you're kind of having a water cooler chat with yourself.
Ooh, maybe you are.
Yeah, I have a water cooler.
Remember when I earlier said some of the baffling things that you said?
Yeah, I'm going to get a water cooler.
What's going on with Tim? Yeah. He's been hanging out by the water cooler all day.
Yeah.
There's not even any water in it. What's he doing?
And he's by himself, talking about how, wow, I wonder if I could have done this. I wonder if I could have done this.
Anyway, I mean, I think this does this whole. What I wanted to point out too is that we do try to be kind of loose and see where things go. Since we got some feedback, I don't know, a couple months ago about that. Just like, just let it go. And we have tried to kind of let that go, and just be. So thank you for your long email, Timothy. But you put so much effort into it. I felt like we had to read it all. Let's see. Where are we? Oh, we're like an hour and a half. I think maybe we'll cut it off here.
Yeah, do the next one next time. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do the next one next time. We've got some reviews, and like I said, I think next time, very likely that we'll push us over that 75 review limit, and we'll do a drawing, an on-air drawing of some gifts for next time that we will mail out.
We're going to do an unprecedented thing now, and do 6 episodes for this.
Yes, we are, because this game has been so darn long. And I had to restart, and et cetera. Okay, so what's going to happen next for Tim is eventually he's going to make his way out of the wards and to Ravel's maze. And there's some good story bits that I'm sure we'll talk about at that point. And then we're going to go off and do the Outlands and Carceri and Cursed. and all of that, and come back to Sigil, which will leave us just the end game, which is the Fortress of Regrets, to tackle for the last episode, where we normally try to sort of summarize the game and talk about sort of what we think the pillars of the game are, or the things that we would take away for our future games. So I think that's what we'll aim to do. We'll see. This has been an interesting road. These RPGs, man, they take up a lot.
Yeah, we got to space these suckers apart as much as we can.
Yep, so after we do Baldur's Gate 2 next, then no, that will not happen. We will not.
I won't make it.
We would have to have a whole year to do Baldur's Gate 2.
And I played that thing co-op. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Took us forever.
I didn't finish it. That's the one of all these games I didn't finish. These 5. Okay. In the meantime, let's see. You can find the podcast on Twitter at @DevGameClub. I monitor that daily, so you can shoot me a line and I will respond back. Or shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com. We are still in that little bit of a review drive. Very close, like single digits, just 1 or 2 away, I think, from 75 at this point. So it'd be great.
I feel sometimes like we're on a PBS drive show where some callers standing
we want your words. We've been playing Planescape. We just want more words. So go find that in iTunes and do a review. I'm subscribed all around the world and stuff, so I will hopefully get to your review. If you don't hear it on the cast, shoot me an email, and maybe I'm not subscribed to your particular country. And then I guess you can find me at Brett_Duville on Twitter, and him at
Tim Longo Jr. with a
JR at the end.
I wait to see if you're going to follow up on that.
Yeah, we will see you all in Sigil next week. Good night.
Good night.